Your job as CEO is not to pass the buck when you get to a tough spot. It's to be the person that makes the call and be the person that says, yeah, you got to hold me responsible. I can't promise it's the right choice, but I own it. And it's amazing how much respect you'll get from your staff or your investors for being that person that steps in front of the train and is like, I don't know what to do. And, we're going to do this. And you just do it. And it may or may not be the right choice, but that decisiveness is so much better than a circle of indecision where people can't decide.
A quick interruption to remind you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Hey, it's Ari Santiago. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode. We have Austin McChord, who's the CEO of Casana, the former CEO of Datto, fellow Connecticut resident, and somebody whose company I've done business with for a really, really long time. So special episode. Austin, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Listen, it's my pleasure. It's the Made in America podcast. So we always start off with the same two questions.
Okay.
What do you make and why do you make it?
Sure. Well, I've made a lot of things, but right now what I make is toilet seats, believe it or not. That's the general reaction when you tell people you make toilet seats. But we make smart toilet seats, and our goal is to build and deliver a toilet seat that's actually a full-on medical device that can get your blood pressure, blood oxygenation, and a bunch of other vital signs about you. And we really want to deliver something that delivers clinical grade values so that your doctor could actually titrate your medication, so adjust what medications you're getting based on the data that's coming off the seat.
So the idea is sort of the why behind it then is really about driving better health outcomes for people?
Yeah, absolutely. And treating things like hypertension and heart failure in a non-invasive way that doesn't take any time out of anybody's life. And it's interesting, there's a ton of stuff out there right now. Obviously you can go buy a blood pressure cuff and you can stand on a scale and use an SpO2 thing, but people don't do it. They'll do it twice or something like that, and then they just stop because it's like an extra thing they have to do in their day. And so the toilet seat is like the ultimate hack that you're coming. You are going to use this product whether you like it or not. And we can kind of guarantee that that's going to come around and happen. So we get the adherence part for free. Right. And then it takes an enormous amount of data science, math, and incredible sensor technology, because it turns out your butt is a pretty bad place to get vital signs about you. But we can pull this information out and then make it available and track it longitudinally, which actually ends up being really valuable in treating all kinds of different chronic conditions.
Okay, so I did tease a little bit about the Datto and some other stuff, and I do want to get to that.
We can talk about that too.
100%. And I'm sure you get asked about it a million times. And you mean you're a Connecticut kid, grew up in Newtown, went to RIT, built a unicorn business in Connecticut. We'll talk about that, which is hugely important. But I'm kind of interested in the toilets. So let's start off with toilets. I guess sounds like what we're saying here, if I peel the onion a little bit, is one of the biggest challenges with medical data is compliance. Meaning it's all great if I can get your information, but you need to comply for me to get it, for me to make good decisions, just like anything else, right? Garbage in, garbage out. Yep. If I'm going to help you make good health decisions, I need good data. And the problem you're really solving is people's inability to continuously provide contextualized data rather than just giving it to you when there's an acute situation, right? You have a heart attack, you're going to the hospital, you're getting all kinds of treatment. Yeah. But they're not going to have the history of the 6 months leading up to it. Is that the problem that Casana is trying to solve?
I mean, that's a big part of it, but I think more like look at even simpler conditions like high blood pressure. The vast majority of people who take medication for high blood pressure actually don't even take the right amount.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Because doctors are pretty nervous about what they prescribe, and they're nervous that when you come in, we're capturing your blood pressure at a single point in time. That day, when you're in the doctor's office, you might be nervous. It might be high, it might be low, it might be
frustrated.
All kinds
You've been waiting for an hour.
And so what do? They're like, go get a blood pressure cuff, use a blood pressure cuff, report back what you're getting. And people might do that for like a week, and then they stop because it's annoying. It's just not part of their daily habit. And their conditions change, their medication doesn't. They may make the right lifestyle changes and actually get better, in which case then the side effects from the medication will make you feel awful. Or it could go the other way and their condition's getting worse and they need more medication. and they're just not tracking this stuff. And so the thought process around the toilet seat is like adherence, which is the #1 problem in all of this telemedicine, like vitals tracking stuff we get for free. And so then it comes to what vital signs can we capture, and then how can we make sure that that information is actionable? Because the other piece is that just getting a bunch of data, like from your Apple Watch or something like that, like if you go to the doctor, they'll be like, oh, okay, that's interesting, but I need to run my own test because this isn't a medical device, and they don't trust it. They're not thinking about it in a way of like, oh, this is actionable information. So in our case, we're generating information that you can take action on, you can change a prescription from, and then hopefully improve people's lives and help them live longer, healthier lives.
So sounds like we got a lot of challenges, but you're no stranger to conquering challenges. But I mean, I'm just going to rattle off a couple things that I'm wondering how you're thinking about it. So,
sure.
I mean, one thing you mentioned is your butt isn't historically like I've never had anyone take my blood pressure through my butt before.
Yeah.
So there's probably some challenges there. How are you guys thinking about that? How to get vitals from an area that historically hasn't been used for collecting vitals?
Well, so the company's founder, Nick Cohn, is really the genius behind all this. And we use a tool called a ballistocardiogram, which actually measures the physical function of the heart based on how it affects effectively your weight at like a microgram level. And it creates these waves in what you weigh. Because if you think about your heart, every action is an equal and opposite reaction. So if you're sitting on the toilet and the heart squeezes, it pushes blood up, which naturally would push you down. We can measure that. And we can isolate that out from the train going by, whatever else you might be doing in the bathroom, all these other things, and calculate and track that information and use that to actually back out like what your blood pressure might be.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's
That's really
some
amazing.
Incredible math in order to pull that off.
And you're also able to sort of like, I don't know how to delicately say this, but different people have different amounts of mass in their body, including in their tush.
Yeah, all different shapes and sizes.
And you can,
and we have to go through the clinical trials right now to prove that we can do this for all different shapes, sizes, color, whatever different type of human there is. We've got to prove that we can make it happen. And it's one of the wild things about going through this process and building a medical device is you literally cannot say anything that you have not scientifically proven. And so even something as basic as like the toilet seat will last for this many years, we have to then demonstrate to the FDA, like we'll have to have somebody clean the toilet seat 1,100 times or something like that and make sure that like the waterproofing didn't fail. But each piece has to be verified and tested before we're allowed to really say it publicly.
Wow.
And so
taking the scientific method to a whole other level.
Well, it's definitely very different when you're building a startup, this idea that you have to prove everything out to a regulatory body before you can do it. And it's one of the reasons why medical startups are so rare and why it's so hard, because we're going through all those clinical trials right now in order to prove all the things that we'll say when we can actually have this product available on the market for you to buy.
No Legos and soldering irons. And
no, none of that. Yeah, you cannot fake it till you make it doesn't work in a medical space. And I think Theranos might have tried that, and now like the amount of skepticism is much, much higher.
Yeah, no doubt about it. For anyone that doesn't know, Theranos was a very high-flying startup that supposedly was going to do blood testing in a very rapid way with ultra-small samples in a portable box, and unfortunately turned out that it was all a hoax and it never worked at all. And so that anyway. So we've got the issue of sort of we're solving the problem of, can I say fidelity? Like meaning having consistent data, because you're going to use the toilet.
Adherence is really the word.
Okay. So then you got to figure out, how to do blood pressure through someone's derriere.
Yep.
What about like we have multiple toilets in our house. We also have 4 people that live in the house.
Yeah.
So how do you think about going, okay, well in the master bathroom, there's 2 people. I got to know from some way whether it's, Ari or Erica. How are you guys thinking about that?
Yeah, no. So we have to do user identification as part of it. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. Like most smart scales can tell you and somebody else who lives in your house apart.
They can?
Yeah. And they typically do it just based on weight.
Okay.
And it's actually kind of funny that you ask couples they live together, and there's like a bunch of people that are like, I think me and my husband are the same weight. And so then we got to scale out and we measure them. No, you're way off. You may like look similar, but it's actually relatively rare that people are the same weight. But then if you were to go down further, like there's things you can look at like skin tone, shape of an ECG wave, like you can really get into it if you want to, but typically like weight is usually a pretty easy way to differentiate multiple people who live in a house.
Is there challenges technically, like when you're thinking about, I think, and I should have it in my notes here. I know the toilet seats are being manufactured, I think, in Wisconsin, Sheboygan.
Yeah.
Right, which apparently is the toilet seat manufacturing capital of the U.S.
Well, it's near Kohler, where you've got there, and then Bemis is our manufacturing partner for the toilet seats. And they're an incredibly large toilet seat manufacturer. It's wild. I've been to the plant. Like, it runs 24/7. They convert rail cars full of plastic pellets into toilet seats that come out the other side. And it's just an absolutely massive thing that people just don't think about. Everything that you encounter has to be made somewhere. Right. And yeah, that's what's happening there.
Well, you probably use a lot of toilet seats. So when you think about just like, the technical challenges, is there technical challenges of getting the sensors and whatever you need? And I assume it's Wi-Fi enabled or Bluetooth or something. Yep. Like, is there challenges of just getting the technology into the seat itself? Or is
I think that some of the stuff is designing new form factors for the technology. And then adapting it for our use case. And a lot of this stuff was built and designed for wearables, whereas, we're a toilet seat, so we have a different form factor. And then especially if you're looking at like optical stuff, shining light through your thighs, very different than shining it through your wrist, in which case like it'll bounce off the bone. But like we can't rely on that, so we have to look at backscatter. There's all kinds of different pieces associated with like that part of the technology. But one of the benefits of a toilet seat is that it's huge.
Yes.
So
especially compared to like a watch.
Compared to a watch.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of space for electronics. There are some challenges like we can't really use the radios while you're sitting on the toilet because there's giant, largely water-filled human sitting over top of them, which will hurt the radio fidelity. So there's things like that we have to take into account. But we do have some benefits by having all that volume. Means that we can put years worth of battery power in the toilet seat, and so that makes life a lot easier because you only have to change the batteries every couple of years type deal.
Oh, that is pretty interesting. Yeah, for people that don't know, one of the biggest challenges for sort of Wi-Fi or radio frequency is going through water. And as you alluded to, the human body's hugely water.
Well, all radio frequencies don't really penetrate through water. That's why like submarines have to have the little thing that goes up, and yeah.
It's very difficult. Absolutely. So why this business? After the exit from Datto, which again we'll get to in a little bit, you've also, after leaving Datto, you're still on the board there. You also done a number of investments, which we'll also talk about. But of all the things you could have done, which I'm sure the list is long and varied, why this?
So it's kind of funny because you could, if I like answered it in a word, the word would be COVID. If I answered it in a few sentences, I think like there could be part of it about like it's amazing to turn to have an opportunity to take somebody else's dream and turn it into a big business sounds really exciting. But then a longer story is I was actually going to run a cybersecurity company based in France, and I signed a deal, was going to buy a huge part of this business, was going to come in with some investors that I knew. We made all this stuff happen. We got through due diligence. We had actually already wired the money away from us and was sitting in like the escrow account. And then Air France called and was like, we don't fly to France anymore. So like you can't go to France because it's COVID. And this was happening in March of last year. And so we're going to find out how force majeure works because I was going to be CEO of a company I could not go to, which just seemed like a real bad call. Yeah. So we bailed. And that was wild, and all that unwound. And it turns out that the company's actually doing really well, and they continue to be successful, which is awesome. but I was adrift. I didn't know what to do, and was talking to a really good friend of mine who's also an investor and a pharma exec, and he wanted to do things for sort of the senior care space and looking at technology for senior care space. And I knew someone at RIT who had this toilet seat idea, and it was one of a whole bunch of ideas. And so I presented kind of his papers and stuff to my friend, and he looked through it and he's like, wow, this actually could be amazing, and there's an enormous market for this. And so then I called up Nick and I was like, Nick, like, let's do something. And I think that I can make your dream a reality, and you've got the science side, but I can learn how to actually make this and sell it and
two
get it
important
out there.
aspects.
Yeah,
of
those
business.
are two important things.
Yeah.
And so, like, do you want to work together on this project? And so he's like, yes, like, toilet seats are my dream and my life's calling, which literally, like, Nick will answer that way, which makes him one of one.
I love the fact that if we're playing Jeopardy and the square comes up COVID, the question is, what converts a technology CEO into the CEO of a toilet seat company?
Yeah.
Answer, COVID. COVID really does change everything.
Yeah, COVID, my life was going one way one moment and now a different. Yeah, it's wild.
That's pretty amazing. So let's just take a trip down sort of memory lane and connect this back sort of to Connecticut in manufacturing. Sure. So maybe for anyone that doesn't know, sort of maybe you could just give us sort of the brief overview, of who Datto is, where Datto's headquartered, how it's connected to Connecticut, and just give people the kind of the
Absolutely. So Datto is headquartered in Norwalk, Connecticut. It is largely almost like a cybersecurity company now for managed service providers and small businesses. And it originally started in the data backup and disaster recovery space. I founded the company in 2007, started it kind of in a basement, and grew it to around 2,000 employees by the time that I left. And went through just a whole wild ride associated with that. For the first 6 years, I bootstrapped the company, so I didn't raise any outside fundraising, and then brought in some outside fundraising, managed to grow the company even faster, and really went through, for me, like a huge personal evolution of, rather than trying to do everything myself, like actually hiring an incredibly talented and capable management team and going through successive generations of management team, which ends up happening, and putting the business on an incredible trajectory. Datto went public last year, and so is now a publicly traded company under the stock ticker MSP, who are Datto's customers.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, and I think Datto became what's known as a unicorn, right? Which is a startup company valued over
a unicorn many times
over. Yeah, which is a startup company valued at $1 billion, which is a pretty unique Connecticut situation. And Austin's well known for this, and MSP or managed service providers, companies that help small businesses manage their technology, cybersecurity strategy, and of course backup and disaster recovery.
Yeah, no, MSPs are such an important part of like the whole IT ecosystem, and basically more businesses get their IT from an MSP than any other method out there. And these MSPs serve as like virtual CIOs, virtual CISOs, really are solving all that technology work for the small business. And in a world where there's all these SaaS platforms, there's on-prem, there's Azure, there's cloud, there's just so much stuff, the idea that like a business could do it themselves is almost impossible. And so these MSPs play such a vital role in enabling small business to take advantage of all the technology that's out there in the world today.
So let's talk a little bit about scaling a business. You're starting at the beginning again, and you mentioned sort of starting in the basement and sort of fake it till you make it. And there's a famous story from Datto that has to do with another company that has Connecticut roots in Enfield, which is Lego that I alluded to earlier, right? And maybe just quickly tell the Lego story.
Yeah, just so the original Datto devices had multiple pieces of Lego in them, and it was, granted, it didn't like serve like a deeply structural port, but I needed to cover up some like portholes, and it was cheaper to buy a black Lego bricks than it was to get a custom piece of plastic fabricated. But yeah, there was also a lot of hot glue in those original products, and was hand soldering them. I'm actually quite good now at surface mount soldering. So if you ever need something repaired, like I can do it very quickly. But the first several hundred I built myself.
So how did you convert from like real just sort of bootstrapping entrepreneur. It's one of those sort of classic IT stories, right? It's a basement or a garage. It's sort of doing it yourself. So just sort of talk briefly about you talked about personal evolution. It's not something we've talked about a lot in the podcast, but I mean, a lot of people in the audience, I think, could benefit from understanding what you meant by that and how you changed as a leader from in the basement to 2,000 employees and how important your personal evolution was to the growth of the business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the classic cases of like, what got you here won't get you there. And in the beginning, I did everything because it was just me. And I would, whatever I was spending my time doing, that's what I would hire somebody in to do. But I was still sort of the technical wizard. I needed to know how everything worked. I was determined to like be a stem cell at the company, that I could be customer support, I could be sales, I could make the device. You could do any of these pieces. And what happens as your business grows is that you run out of time in the day. Like no matter what you do, you can reduce the amount of sleep only so much before you go crazy, and you cannot buy more than 24 hours in a day. And so you hit a natural sort of limiting function. And it actually happened the first time, and like the moment that it dawned on me, we had a team offsite. And at this point, I actually had some senior management team.
How big was the company? Do you remember?
Probably like 150 employees. And so we went and we did the offsite, and one of the things at the offsite is they had this weird like game where you're supposed to like move these balls through these tubes with like vacuum pressure, and people are supposed to lift and close different valves. And like my team was like struggling to like do this, and I just told them like step away from the table. And I did all the valves and set the record time. And the person who was doing it was like, that's great, but you also failed. Like you completely failed at the purpose of this. And that the job is not like, can you get the ball where it needs to go? But like you need the team to work together to get the ball where it needs to go. And they were right. And so it requires like a big transition in thinking from I will do all the things and I will tell you, go turn that screw, go do that thing, to like, I need to entrust you to do it. And so instead of telling you to turn the screw, it's like, go make 1,000 units and you figure out how to do it. And your communication skills as a leader have to improve dramatically. You effectively have to incept the people who work for you to like go do these things rather than just like very direct, concrete things. You're asking them to take charge and take ownership over different pieces. And so for me, that was like a big piece. And then I think also just like managing by brand. And you get to a point where your company has values, and you have to like live those values all the time. And as you cross kind of that around that 100 employee mark is the point where like you don't know everyone at your company anymore. And they certainly don't know you. And so they have this perception of who you are or what it means to work at your company. And you have to be really deliberate and intentional about what that is, because you don't want that perception to be this guy sucks or is a jerk or whatever, or that like the company doesn't do the right things for its customers or its employees, et cetera. And so you've really got to live that like every step of the way. And that's hard because you have to sort of tailor your personality. Like there's parts of what make up you that you should not bring to work, and there's parts of what make up you that you need to emphasize in order to live that and to create sort of this version of the brand that aligns with the values and make sure that you're doing that all the time.
Oh, that's incredible. So how did you actually make the shift, right? So you're the guy that's running around opening and closing the vacuum tubes. And I mean, you're a smart guy. Intellectually, I'm sure when someone explained it to you, you grasped this concept of how to change your leadership style. But intellectually understanding something, but then putting that into practice is difficult.
It's very hard.
How did you do it?
So all this sort of happened that we had 6 years of growth with no outside financing. And then a couple things happened and I'm going to add some more story to kind of contextualize this. So just bear with me a minute.
Sure.
So in February of 2013, we got an offer from a major strategic to buy the business. And they offered to buy the company for $100 million. And at the time, I was the sole shareholder because I did not know how to give anybody stock options. So no one got any. I have all of them. And so I would have gotten a $100 million check. And I said no. And a bunch of reasons, but the primary one was that this big strategic is like, what will we do with an office in Connecticut? We looked at your senior team. They appear to be the friends of yours from high school. The person who runs your customer support division's previous job was cable installer. It is just like, we want your technology, but we're going to fire everyone who works for you. It's pretty much what they said if you read between the lines. And this scrappy team had gotten us to where we were. And I'd never really considered that the business could possibly be worth $100 million. But so in turning that down was this major transition point in that I now, one, realized like I love what I do, and didn't want to stop. My team matters an incredible amount to me. And that I needed to make this not the biggest mistake I've ever made in my entire life. And so, the only way that could ever be a good decision to turn it down is I have to make Datto worth many, many more times that. And that's when I became a lot more open to bringing in outside help. And so we raised some money. Not that we needed it. Our company was profitable, but we had the opportunity to bring some people that I had a tremendous amount of respect for on the board who were actual operators. And so we brought on Paul Sagan, who used to be the CEO of Akamai, Steve Harrod, who was the CTO of VMware. So these people understood the world that we were living in and started to hire out kind of that senior team to either help grow the people that were friends of mine, or I need to bring in people who have real operational experience to take this to the next step. And in part of that transition and realizing kind of with that offsite and stuff, I got like a CEO coach person. And it was interesting because I talked to a whole bunch of them. And the idea of getting one felt like a personal failure. Like, oh my God, I can't even run my own goddamn company. I need a coach or a person. And so I picked somebody who had never run a business before, done anything. And there's all these CEO coaches out there that are like, I was incredible at Jumbo Co. And that's great. But then you sit down with them and they're like, at Jumbo Co, we did this. And I don't give a shit what happens at Jumbo Co. I want to run my business my way. And so this guy was actually, his former job was he was a criminal profiler for Scotland Yard. And what he ended up doing is he did 360s with my team. So everybody who worked with me and a bunch of people at the company, and they're basically like, what are the things that are really good about Austin and what stuff really sucks? And he put it all together and compiled this report. And he's like, look, I'm not responsible for anything that you do one way or another. I'm just telling you, this is what the world thinks of you. And I looked at it and I go, okay. And it takes a little bit to be like, yeah, that is accurate, And so then you go through that and you're like, all right, well, these things are really good and I want to emphasize them. This stuff sucks. Some of this stuff, I'm telling you, it's going to be a problem forever. It's baked into who I am. I'm an impatient human being. We're not going to fix that one, but we can fix this one. And you can fix these different pieces. And so you really just sort of work on it. And it's like, all right, let me be conscious about that. And then we'll do another 360 in 6 months and see what you can do there. And it's tough work because you're changing parts of yourself. But for me, it was all about the mission of getting Datto where it needed to go. And I think that transition point that happened in February was this idea that the company was so much bigger than me. And so it meant making really horrible, tough decisions of friends of mine from high school had to get fired or demoted. And you've got to deal with that. And there's all kinds of stuff that sucks. It's personally awful. But in order to deliver for all the people who work at the company, you have to make those choices. And it was just, that was the cycle. It's I am going to make the right choices for the business, even if they are personally deeply painful.
And you credit having an outside coach to help you see the right decisions? Is that, not to distill all that down to one thing?
Yeah. No, well, so first off, The outside coach has no opinion on what the right decisions are.
Yeah.
Right. I know what the right decisions are. And to some degree, like you realize and you see it and it's like this person and you're like, I love you, man. Like you've been part of my life forever, this and that, but like this is not the role for you. And the company has grown faster than you can acquire the skills necessary. And so you can offer them a different role, or you can be like, look, I'm going to give you 1.5 years pay and a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm going to help you find another job, but like I have to make these tough choices.
I just want to real quickly on that. I think that that's a common misconception with business coaches that a lot of CEOs have, which is that you hire the coach and they're going to come in and tell you do this or do that. That's not been my experience, and it sounds like it wasn't your experience either.
Oh, I mean, there are coaches that will tell you, but they should just be the CEO then, right? And I actually see that a lot, that like CEOs are like, oh, well, I have to pick between bad option A or bad option B, so I'll ask my board. And it's like, no, like you missed it. You're like, you can present option A and option B, but then you need to come to the board with like, here's why we're going with option B. We've thought about this. Let me know if you disagree. But they're looking for that leadership. And your job as CEO is not to pass the buck when you get to a tough spot. It's to be the person that makes the call and be the person that says, yeah, you got to hold me responsible. I can't promise it's the right choice, but I own it. And it's amazing how much like respect you'll get from your staff or your investors for being that person that steps in front of the train and is like, I don't know what to do. And, we're going to do this. And you just do it. And it may or may not be the right choice, but that decisiveness is so much better than like a circle of indecision where people can't decide.
Damn, that's some really powerful stuff. When you think about how long it took you to make that, was it quick? Because it sounds like you went from sort of Austin version 1 to Austin version 2. Like the way you tell the story almost happened like overnight.
Of course not. Like, I mean, that's like every overnight success is 10 years in the making. Like it doesn't just happen overnight. And there's like great successes and setbacks and a whole thing along the way. And even for me to be like, well, yes, I'm perfect now at running big things. No, I am full of flaws. Right. But I think that I was able to make enough changes fast enough that I earned the right to keep my job. But I really, like, I truly look at it that way, and that like if I felt that I wasn't the best person to run the business, I should go. And those are like really tough things to truly internalize, but it is wild how something that you start can outgrow you, in that you are now a small piece of an enormous machine. And as it starts, and especially like as you get to hundreds of employees, like there are people who come to work, basically spend most of the time that they're awake working on some stupid idea you had years ago for most of the time that they're awake, and you don't even know their name. And so it's just sort of surreal, like how impactful that was. And I think about just like all the times I drove by our office and like could be late at night and I'd see like the lights are on, like the customer support team's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like there are people delivering on sort of your original vision, which is wild.
From the outside, I think a lot of people look at Datto, myself included, and it looks like just a straight line up. Was it like that on the inside? Did it feel like a straight line up? Did it feel like herky-jerky setbacks and movebacks always up? What was it like living it?
I think it was like taking off in a Cessna and trying to turn it into a 747 while you're in the air. And like parts of it are being ripped off and flying apart, and you're just trying to glue and hold all this stuff together. And like we would talk about like what is the number one risk at Datto all the time. Like the senior team would get around and it'd be like implosion, like that we would just blow ourselves up. And it was very hard in that sense of just balancing sales investment versus support investment, marketing, engineering, and you've got all these different sort of levers, and you're trying to keep it all together, and it's tough. And we definitely didn't make the right decision all the time. The macro view, you zoom out enough, and it's, oh yeah, look, it's a hockey stick. But like when you're living it day to day, it's a 5-alarm fire all the time.
That's amazing. How did you find the time, and you're in the 5-alarm fires all the time, how did you think about spending enough time thinking about over the horizon versus also spending time thinking about putting out the fires of today, right? Because if you're only focused on today, the future is probably not going to be what you want. But if you're only focused on the future, feels like you're probably not going to get there. Is that a fair assessment or not?
Yeah, so I think that, if anything, the errors that people make is they spend too much time thinking about the future more often. And so I thought about it, and I was like, I am a crappy fortune teller. And so I would much rather be very nimble. And as we think about building the business, adding the tools, how we structure the teams, how everything works, like the faster the business can move, the less good of a fortune teller I need to be. And that was like always the balance. And I tried to lean on the faster side because like there are not great fortune tellers. If there were, like they would have incredible jobs, or we would be like, oh, fortune teller person, please tell us what's coming tomorrow.
That's right.
And we don't know. So to be nimble was probably like the most important thing. And then from there, yeah, you obviously look at macro trends and you think about stuff and you sort of invest for the future. And like there are two different things. When you're small, you need to make one thing and you need to focus all of your energy on the one thing, and you need to just make it a little bit better, like every day, every week. And like the problem with the small is that like people are like, oh, I want to do 7 things because you're like, this is cool, but it's not as cool as it could be. And I want to do this, and then we could be in this other space. And when you're big, you have the ability to do many things, but you actually run into this problem of like, here, I have this incredibly brilliant engineer. Do I put them on a product that makes $100 million a year in revenue, but is ultimately like very stable, mature, like limited growth opportunity, but they could grow it? Or do I put them on a product that makes $1 million a year in revenue, that if they busted ass might make $2 million a year in revenue, which will mean nothing to my business? Because it's when you're tiny, like $1 million ideas are great. When you're Datto sized, you need $1 billion ideas. And those take forever to incubate, and they're hard, and it's very hard to resource them in a way that allows them to grow. And you see big companies struggle with this all the time of like, how do I invest in the little thing when like, shouldn't I put all my smart people on the big thing?
It means to add $1 million on $1 million idea, you got to make it 100% improvement. To add $1 million to 100 million idea,
well, yeah, you get like a little bit of improvement and you'll gain the million. But if you don't incubate the new ideas, you die on the vine.
So how did you split that baby?
Imperfectly, of course.
Experimentation.
Yeah, well, but you think about like the maturity in Datto's backup products, and like I had strong beliefs around like where networking could go that I think are different than what we ended up delivering on. And yeah, I think there's all sorts of stuff that we played out and played with that I would have done differently, or I would have resourced differently, like hindsight 2020. But
so newsflash, everybody would change some things in the past, right?
Well, of course, yeah. But it, the macro outcome has been very good. But it's it's just always a challenge, and so I think the biggest failure would be to have not made the bets far more than it would be to like have made some bets that didn't pay out.
Didn't pay out, yeah. The thing not done, usually more regrettable. Talk a little bit about, and I've seen some other interviews you've talked about kind of getting talent into Norwalk. And, some people have said there's struggles with getting, talent into Connecticut. You guys seem to have, conquered that in a lot of ways. And you've talked about it before, but maybe just for this audience, talk about your thinking about, what it was like to get the engineers you needed in Norwalk and keep them.
So Norwalk is a bit of a unique location in that the city, as in New York City, is accessible, yet not present. And so you can find a lot of people that are sort of looking for their second job or third job in a space. They've already done that. They did the city thing, and now they're like, you know what? I would like to live somewhere with a lawn. And so like Norwalk is an achievable place for that. And you can get a lot of people to come out of some of those urban centers because they want to start a family. They have all these other personal reasons that might make this space more interesting. And that was a big part of it. And we also found that a lot of senior executives are available sort of in that Fairfield County space because they are commuting into New York and they're, working at these big companies. And it's like, hey, I can save you 4 hours a day and give you the flexibility so that you will make, your kid's ballet performance or whatever it is. Like it's much more of a better work-life balance. And so that works well and has worked well for us. I mean, it's hard to deliver any recruiting advice now because it is all pre-pandemic. Yeah. And in post-pandemic, like Casana has been built almost entirely remotely. And there's I would say almost half the employees, I've never met them in person, which is wild to think about. And so it's just an antithesis of kind of how we operated at Datto. So it's just very different, and the world has changed.
You got to innovate and adapt. Talk about, I know we're kind of getting out of time here, but just want a couple more things. Datto was a channel, I think a channel sales company.
Yeah, channel only.
Channel only, right, which was interesting, right? So I think, speaking of imperfectly splitting the baby, we both can probably think of businesses that have tried to sort of have their cake and eat it too, right? They do direct and channel. That always seems to me to be, fraught with risks and failure because inevitably they're going to collide with each other and whatever. So to me, the most successful companies have chosen either a channel path, right, or they sell direct. When you guys decided to go channel, was that something that you strategically thought about? Was it one of those sort of startup necessity things?
Startup necessity. So we originally were direct to end users. When we were in the basement, we were getting these phone calls from MSPs, and they were like, "Hey, do you guys have a channel program?" and we would be like, "No." And by the fourth phone call, it was like, "Oh, good thing you called. It's launching in 4 hours." And I just made one up. But from there, we realized that the MSPs were willing to do my least favorite part of the business, which is the selling. Mm-hmm. And so they had the relationships with the small businesses. And there was just a huge opportunity to work with them and to empower them. And they had been overlooked by a lot of other vendors. And so to tune the product to that use case was such a huge deal. And it really enabled Datto to be successful.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, to me, that was always one of the big, I don't know if secrets is the right word, but one of the keys to the success was really understanding who your customer is. And you made the statement earlier that the MSPs provide so much support. If the MSPs don't know your product, don't understand their product, very few small business owners are going out and researching and even understand cloud backup, backup to backup, in transit encryption at rest, local to local to cloud. I mean, it's just whatever, right? Protect me. It's really a genius thing that sounds like you sort of stumbled on, but then went really whole hog into. I mean, Datto was really focused on building and developing the channel. And it seems like that was great.
Well, the channel empowered our success. And so you got to pay it forward and keep going in that direction.
Yeah, really smart. How much when you think back at the run through Datto, how much do you attribute to luck or timing versus skill?
I think you need both. Mm-hmm. And it's actually... It's interesting. It's why I advise against being an entrepreneur to a lot of people, because you look at any famous super successful entrepreneur and they're like, "Oh, I worked a zillion hours and didn't sleep and didn't eat and all I did was do work, and boom, I was successful." And there's a whole nother cohort that's probably 10x that size that worked a zillion hours and lost their home and got nothing. Mm-hmm. And so working really hard is not causatory to success, but it's highly correlated, but it takes an enormous amount of luck. And so I think about, the time that we started happened to be at the right time at the dawn of sort of this MSP space. Some of our competitors made some strategically foolish moves that we were able to capitalize on at the right time that allowed us to move forward. There were a few cases where we entered into some business agreements with other people that are probably on par with that time that Microsoft really wanted to sell to the other guy, but he was out buying toilet paper and missed it. And it was just these people came back with some number for us, and it was wow, yeah, that's high. And instead enabled an incredible amount of success. And so there's a whole bunch of just successive Hail Mary or absolute ridiculous luck moments that string together that make it possible, but you probably couldn't string them together without the enormous amount of skill and hard work that sits in between. So you need both.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't be successful without hard work, but hard work isn't the only thing it takes to be
Correct.
successful.
You also need to get lucky.
So something that I, when preparing for this, noticed that, you were recognized in 2017 as one of the top 5 givers nationally, philanthropically. You've been really involved with the Rochester Institute of Technology, where you're a graduate from, right?
Yes.
Yeah, graduate from. You've given a lot of money. It's something that I'm interested to understand what drives that. When you think about it, why do you do it? How do you think about it? Why give?
Well, because it. Mainly, like you don't really want to spend it all like that. That's ridiculous. It's hard when you're dealing with like unfathomably large sums, and at least for me, like the first step in the journey is like how do I pay back like the people that believed in me, and so like I've got my immediate family, my folks, things like that like you make sure that they're taken care of, and the university. Like they took a chance and accepted me to go there, and so it was an opportunity to like, hey, let me see if I can do something impactful. That this is not a university, this is not MIT, it's not Georgia Tech, and what can I do to enable them to create more businesses like Datto, more stories like that, and so was an opportunity to do that, and then further on you think about ways that. What can you do to make it or be super impactful in a lot of people's lives and give back to those that made your success possible? And like that is a journey and a project that I will probably be working on for the rest of my life associated with that. But it's also very important to me that like the money does go back and goes back in a reasonable time period. Because sometimes the challenge with a lot of foundations is that like they're like, why give $1 today when I could give $2 tomorrow? And it's like, well, because then you'll give no dollars ever by that definition. And so it's actually all set up in this like crazy mechanic that like it has to all get spent down in 100 years, so that it like I do not want to create the Andrew Carnegie's or some other thing like that. It's like, no, like Austin lived and it happened and it gave it away and it's done.
And so that's like, a 100-year fuse, if you will.
Yeah, it's all programmed to do that. Because I don't know, I would not want like my children's children to end up terrible people and who knows what. And that's just, the world doesn't need more oligarchs.
Yeah, no doubt about that. When you think about where to give and how much to give, I'm just curious, like, I mean, you don't need to talk dollars or whatever, but just how do you think about that when you sit down and go, like, I have options, right? You think about the school, there's people that need homes, there's people that need to be fed, there, whatever, education. How do you, like, when you think about that, how do you think about where to give and where to make an impact?
I think you look for things that are enduring, and that will give repeatedly. And so, it's like, if you give dollars that get consumed immediately, like there are many, many very noble causes to do that, but those dollars are gone. And so what are the things that you can do that are going to set them up so that they'll give for a very, very long time? And like recently, like I've actually been looking into a bunch of stuff of like, what can I do as far as like helping expand parks in the state and nationally, and can I buy land adjacent to them and add it in and grow, and that those are neat areas where you can do things like that will set stuff up that will be forever, and so that piece of land will give forever back to the community that it's in. And so that's probably like my biggest focus, is looking for those things that are really going to endure and persist indefinitely.
So the money ends, but the things that the money helped to enable can live on forever.
Correct.
So
yep.
Make a lasting impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Listen, I want to go to rapid fire round of questions.
Fire it away.
This has been really great, Austin. All right. First question: Red Sox or Yankees?
So I grew up a Mets fan. So that means I basically root for whoever's losing.
Okay. Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Dunkin'.
Staycation or exotic destination?
Exotic destination.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
Sports car.
Do you have a favorite business book?
Maybe Blink.
Blink, a good one. If you could do anything, and it had to be something other than the CEO of Casana, and we can't say investor because you're also already doing that. You had to do something totally different than what you're doing right now. What would you do?
I would direct the Super Bowl.
Direct the Super Bowl. I really like that. What's one thing that you think you learned early in your career or early in life that you think propelled you to all the success that you've had?
That you can learn almost anything.
And what's something that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Austin, and if he'd listened to you, you think it'd make a really positive impact on his life trajectory?
Life trajectory has been pretty good. So I think probably a lot around just like listening and communicating better.
Listening and communicating better. Can never go wrong with more listening and more communicating. Austin, it's been a personal pleasure to have you on. Thank you for Datto, something that's been meaningful to me, for what you've done for Connecticut, for your philanthropy, and what you're continuing to do. It's a great shining example for everybody. I appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thanks so much.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct, a CompassMSP company.
As always, thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with me today. You know, my goal is to help build a community where we can learn and grow together. Your input, feedback, and engagement is critical to making that happen. Please do comment, like, and subscribe so more and more people can hear what we're doing and join our community of growth and success. Thanks so much for tuning in. Talk to you again soon.